Good afternoon. Welcome back to Rio Grande Perspectives. My name is Chris. I hope you're doing well. Thanks for watching. Before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you to those who left some comments on the other videos. In particular, I wanted to bring up a comment somebody left on the video regarding the second greatest commandment, which is to love one's neighbor as oneself. He or she brought up hukuk ul ibad. Pardon my Arabic, I know it needs some work, but that means the rights of others, essentially. And that's also in Islam regarded as the second greatest commandment, which I think underscores the commonality between what Jesus taught and what Islam teaches, that not many Christians are aware of that. In Islam, this goes so far as to say, we could take the hypothetical case of somebody, let's just imagine that God guided their life in such a way that they died as a martyr, which is, a great blessing to have God give you that opportunity. So we can say, wow, the relationship with God was stellar. It was ideal. But if that person had all kinds of issues, sins between him and those around him, he couldn't go straight to paradise. Those things would have to be rectified. That's how important forgiveness and reconciliation between human beings is. And if we have things that need to get fixed between us and the world around us, we need to do that to the best of our ability. Pray for God's help in those endeavors, because God is very serious about hukuk ul ibad, the rights of others. It's a great point. Religion isn't a matter of being the lucky person who just happened to hear, out of all these, thousands of choices out there of these different religions, you just happen to hear the right truth proposition and you subscribe to it, and that is a belief you carry in your heart, but it doesn't translate into concrete activities and lifestyle and the way we look at others. I'm sorry, that religion would not be a correct one. And so any idea of a purely faith-based religion is just, it's false. I know that's going to get some people upset, especially in particular branches of Christianity, but there's just no basis for this, not in any revealed scriptures, not in reason. So if that's your idea, I really invite you to consider that. What if you're wrong? What if you were incorrect and you face Judgment Day with nothing but faith, with nothing but certain beliefs, and you find out that you were supposed to reach Judgment Day with a life where you did your honest best to put right the things that you did wrong, to seek the forgiveness of those you have harmed. We don't want to go there in the wrong way. Anyways, to get back on track here, I wanted to look some more at the conformity experiments that we talked about in the last episode. If you didn't catch that, I encourage you to take a look at that, or this next part here won't make much sense. But I'll summarize it to say that in the 1950s, a social psychologist named Solomon Asch did a number of experiments that studied the susceptibility that people have to conform to the opinions of others. In short, he did this by presenting people. He did this by bringing his test subjects into a room where there were actors, and the actors would give wrong answers. Wrong answers that were clearly wrong. We're talking about, in this case, the length of one line versus another. So you had a shorter line, a longer line, an even longer line. The actors in this experiment would intentionally give the wrong answer, and the person who was being experimented on would be measured in terms of how willing they were to agree with obviously wrong answers. And so these experiments found that most people did not agree with the wrong answers. Some 64% gave the right answer. However, a disturbingly large percent of people gave what were clearly wrong answers in order to be among the the popular crowd. And there were variations done on these experiments. And as bad as it sounds that people would give, as bad as it sounds that people would agree to obviously wrong things, Ash did find that here I'm quoting from a summary of the article, Ash found that the presence of a true partner, that means a real participant or another actor told to give the correct response to each question, decreased conformity. In studies that had one actor give correct responses to the questions, only 5% of participants continued to answer with the majority. In subsequent interviews, subjects claimed a degree of warmth and closeness toward the partner and attributed an increase in confidence to their presence. Still, subjects rejected the notion that it was the partner who allowed them to answer independently. Power of a true partner in the real world, where deceptions can be very elaborate, is a big deal. Okay, so in the real world, we're not looking at which, is this line shorter or longer than this line or this line. I mean, we're talking about very complex things well beyond two-dimensional shapes on paper. And so you see, when people conform to the majority of things in this world, it's very, very messy. But even if you can't sift through all the facts, you still you do see the conformity in so many things. Some expected answer is given, people fall into formation, they march the way they're told to march. We can look at I want to be careful with language just because I don't care to have this censored or taken down, but we had the thing that happened 4 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, and the whole world lost its mind, and everybody did ridiculous things that they were told to do, and they allowed things to be put into their bodies that had no justification for. And you see this all the time. People are put into situations where they're given a menu with 2 choices, and everybody just picks those 2 things. Very, very few people ever look at things outside of that menu, whether it's politics, whether it's opinions about religion, right or wrong, meanings of things. most people will just fall into whatever camp is given to them. And I think one of the roles that a prophet plays in our world is to be the type of figure that Solomon Ash described as a true partner. A true partner in Ash's experiments was somebody that gave the correct answers, and simply seeing the correct answer spoken by one person helped the other people that were struggling to say what they knew was right, but they were too timid. They were intimidated by the majority. Sometimes all it takes is one person or a small group of people to say what is clearly true, and then the more timid people are encouraged to say what they know is true, but they were afraid of saying. So that's one of the roles of a prophet. A prophet comes into the world and says the things that you deep down inside you know are true. We talked earlier about the concept in Islam of fitra, that there are certain innate inclinations and understandings built into us about very fundamental things, like the oneness of God and certain fundamentals about morality and how we should behave. And we all know these are true at a deep level. We might not want to admit it. We might have conflicting interests. We might know that, well, if we say this thing, there could be ramifications and, certain punishments coming my way from the world around me. I might be ostracized, but we know these things are true. And so a prophet is somebody that brings people face to face with that fitra, with that inborn inclination to what is true and right, especially about God. So Abraham, I think, is probably how do you rank the prophets? Maybe you can't. Maybe that's something only God can do. But I think it's probably safe to say that the story of Abraham maybe is one of the most useful stories to us. And he is, after all, called the friend of God. I don't know how you actually end up ranking the prophets, but he's definitely up there. If he's not the best prophet, he's definitely close to the top. Because, at least in the Jewish teaching, Abraham found God before he became a prophet. Abraham found God through reason and contemplation, not through divine intervention, coming into his life and revealing things supernaturally. He found God, he found the oneness of God through just using his God-given mind and finding his way back to the fitra. He recognized the patterns of error that were around him. He saw certain things about the idolatry that just sort of, once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. And then he devised some tests whereby he could judge the prevailing religious ideas of his time, and also use these tests not only to confirm his own fitra about God, but to share this with other people. In one of the stories, you find this in Jewish tradition and also in the Qur'an. Abraham's father was an idolater. So Abraham, he grows up in this. And when he wants to challenge it, he ends up going into a house, a temple of idolatry, smashing the idols, all except for one. He leaves the biggest idol undisturbed, and he puts the hammer or the whatever the implement was in the hand of that idol. People kind of suspect Abraham because he had been already sort of preaching against this stuff, and so they figured, yeah, it's probably that guy, that troublemaker. So they call him into question, and he said, I didn't do anything. These idols, they got in a fight, and the biggest one smashed the other ones. And the people said, well, we know you're lying. These idols can't do that. And Abraham said, yeah, that's my point. They can't do that, so why are you worshiping them? And nonetheless, they were still angry at him. They somehow found ways to override their own realization that he was right, cognitive dissonance. And most people just want to stay the course of what they've been doing, what their parents have been doing, what their grandparents have been doing. Most people just want to keep doing that. They don't want to go against the grain. But Abraham was different. So he left everything. He one of the reasons that Abraham is so great, it was Abraham against the world. He broke off with his father's family, so he didn't have the inheritance. He didn't inherit an estate from his father. He made a clean break. He went to a different country. He followed God. He left idolatry. Later on, he gets into a conflict with Nimrod, who, is a world figure at that time. Nimrod tells Abraham to worship a large fire. And he says, why? Why would I do that? Water can put out fire. And so Nimrod says, well, go ahead and worship the water then. And he says, why would I do that when the clouds come and they bring up, they suck up all the water. He's referring to evaporation there. And Nimrod says, okay, well then worship the clouds. And Abraham says, why? When the wind blows away the clouds. And Nimrod says, okay, worship the wind then. And Abraham says, why? When I could go inside of my house and then the wind doesn't touch me. Basically what's going on here is, this might just be a legend. I think that would be the safe thing to say. But what it's underscoring is that Abraham would devise tests. He came up with a methodology for examining the beliefs of his time in a way that would engage the people around him and hopefully break them out of the hypnosis of idolatry. And then when Nimrod wasn't happy with having that spell broken, he orders Abraham to be thrown into a furnace where God rescues him out of it. I'm recalling that there is a beautiful way that Rabbi Daniel Lapin, I'll provide a link below. Daniel Lapin is a rabbi that has had a beautiful career talking to Christians or other non-Jews, just, not really proselytizing them to Judaism, but at least sharing with them things of Judaism with them in a way that is just giving it out without anything, without any expectations of people turning to Judaism. So he has a sermon that he likes to give about Nimrod and Abraham. Nimrod was somebody who is the epitome of the brick maker. Every brick is identical to the next brick. They're a standard form. So in Genesis, when you read the Bible, Nimrod is this tyrant that rules over the land, and he has all these people enslaved making bricks. And it's not simply that the people are making bricks. The brick actually is sort of like a metonym for the people themselves, that they are reduced to this this conformity, this uniformity, this standard form. Any brick can be put in the place of any other brick. There's nothing that really distinguishes one brick from the next. Whereas when Abraham makes an altar, it's of stone. We read in the Torah that an altar made of stones has to just be stones. You cannot cut these stones. You cannot alter their shape. The stones are in whatever form God created them in, and that form has to be respected. No two stones are alike. Rabbi Lapin makes a beautiful sermon about this, and I think it would really underscore beautifully this whole talk about conformity. God is not in the business of making robots. God is not in the business of us just having blind allegiance to what our parents were doing, what our grandparents were doing. Abraham is the ideal human being. He was somebody who was developing a epistemology. He developed basically a method for determining what is real, what is true, what is knowledge that's worth hanging on to as true knowledge, and how to sift out all the things that are not worthy. And he did this in such a way that he clung to God. He was willing to lose everything else in order to do that. And it's for this reason that he's such an ideal person. And again, he is called the friend of God. And it's exactly for such things as this. And I think we need to hold this example in very high esteem and to follow after it. We have to do two things. We ourselves have to develop an epistemology, a method for determining what is true and false. And we also have to sort of move beyond just judging between true and false, and also have a way by which we follow that which is true. And that's really what I hope to have the focus of this channel be, that there are these two phases. There's phase one, or part one we could call it, which is sifting between true and false, and part two, which would be the pursuit of those things which are true. We see both of these things in the life of Abraham, and I wanted to bring up, although I might be running out of time, as I've said, I run into technical issues when these things get much over 20 minutes, so that might be enough for right now.